Well, let's get into the NFL, and I guess let's actually start there. How are you feeling about this season starting with training camp in late July right now?
Um, I'm optimistic, and I guess in part I'm optimistic because if we can't figure out how to get football back, it's how many other parts of life are we not going to be able to get back with restaurants and youth sports and kids going back to school and colleges starting back up and people going to the dorm. So I'm just trying to stay optimistic, not because I want football and sports, but also because I think if we're able to pull that off, hopefully we're able to pull off a lot of the other aspects and get back to a semi-normal life by then. So
I could see so the Broncos before they built Dove Valley used to go to Greeley every year and
yeah,
have football training camp there. So I do wonder if the NFL will mandate some sort of you have to stay in dorms or a hotel, you have to sequester yourself from the rest of the world for training camp in the preseason at least and sort of see what's going on there. And
yeah,
that's an easy way. And I think a lot of the older players have talked about how they missed the camaraderie that came with going to the dorms in Greeley. Can't imagine what those dorms are like. Like definitely worse than what we stayed in. So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens there. And I think that the first thing that the NFL did was decided we're just going to continue on as if the world isn't in a pandemic, start free agency normally. And I thought that was a fine decision. There are people that were like, this is so disrespectful. People are upset about this. But I never saw anyone that was actually like, this is disrespectful. They were just like other people thought it was disrespectful.
yeah, yeah.
So I was fine with it. I I do think the biggest loss of the 2020 season so far is the NFL draft is no longer in Vegas. We no
Yeah.
longer get the Bellagio fountain as the stage for the NFL draft and the players being taken on boats to the stage to shake Roger Goodell's hand. That
And
feels
it,
like a loss.
it it's definitely a loss. I imagine like a very slow rowboat, and that they thought it was gonna like work great, and then it's this very anticlimactic of, oh, there goes Chase Young. He's on the boat. All right, he's still going, and it was gonna be this awkward disaster, but maybe they would have
It would have been
got it better.
funny.
But we'll not know at least for a couple of years now, since
Yeah. It would have been funny if they could have like still been making picks. So you've got like three boats and a like procession of people like going to shake Roger Goodell's hand, which is one of the worst. Like no one actually likes shaking Goodell's hand. It's
right.
just like a thing that they do. Um, so I am sad about that, but I guess let's get into like how do you feel like so far the Broncos have done in free agency?
It was a unique free agency just with everything going on, and I think contracts kind of the market shifted heavily as everything went on, and so I think some of the deals that they signed early on, people were excited about, and I think they got some good players. But I think looking back with hindsight now, like the value just wasn't there compared to some of the deals that were had in the second half of free agency, and I don't know how much of that was the COVID and people thinking future caps would drop, or how much was just money dried up and didn't quite play out as expected. So,
So looking at the cap right now, how are the Broncos situated compared to last season? Like, are they in a better place, worse place?
um, I'd say about the same to slightly worse. I think they have about 17 million in cap space right now, which is about league average. And I think looking ahead 1 year into the future, they're also sitting very middle of the pack. And I think at this time last year, they were kind of looking down in the future. There was more opening, and that's kind of one thought I had about free agency was they where they are in the development cycle. It seems like it maybe would have been a good year to be a little quieter in free agency and save the money for next year. And this year might be kind of Locke's stepping stone year. And then next year they really look like a true contender and they make a big splash. But they they didn't. Not all their moves kind of fit with that mindset. And I think that's probably partly outweighs an optimist, and he wants to win now. Um,
It's
and
sad.
I think they
It's sad when Elway is more of an optimist about this than you are, because you are always an optimist about the Broncos. So that really, for listeners, that should temper your expectations about what's going on here.
And I mean, to cut to the chase, I think the team the Broncos have constructed and will finish constructing in the draft, it's all going to come down to Locke. If Locke continues playing like he does next year and makes that next step and becomes a franchise quarterback, like, the future's very bright. And they've, assuming they get some good injury luck and stuff like that, I think they're going to be a good team and they're going to be a playoff team. And if Luck doesn't take that step, then I don't think they're good enough to carry subpar quarterback play. And that's probably true for 80-90% of teams in the NFL. If you get the QB play, you're going to be a good team. If you don't get the QB play, you're not going to be a good team. So,
well, and I mean, they really, shored up that position with one of their free agent signings, Jeff Driscoll. Do you know anything about Jeff Driscoll? He's
the
a quarterback.
Backup quarterback?
Yeah.
I'd kind of forgotten about him.
Actually, the last podcast Quinn and I did was the same situation where I was like, I forgot to look up anything about Jeff Driscoll. I did again. I think that's fine. He's the backup quarterback, and we have a starting quarterback. I'm just so happy. And, I mean, they got rid of Flacco, and he failed his physical. So what does that mean as far as Flacco failing his physical? Does that have an implication on the cap?
I think it's complicated. I think he could be due, injury settlement termination pay. I think it's up to $2 million, and if he signs with someone else, it could be lessened or go to zero. So the cap expert I know, he said not to worry about it too much and that it's not worth getting worked up about. So,
do you think Flacco plays in the NFL again?
I don't think he's going to get a starting job, and I guess it comes down to, does he want to be a backup, and does he want to convince someone that he's a good backup and that he can serve that veteran mentorship role well? And I think there's a definite chance the answer to both of those is no. But there's a lot of former starting quarterbacks out there unsigned. Starters who could be out there, you got Andy Dalton, Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, and Joe Flacco.
So the Broncos lost a few key players from this year. Wolf, Chris Harris Jr., Andy Janovich, the fullback, he's gone. How big of an impact do you think those losses are at this point?
It's kind of everywhere they signed someone, they lost someone as well. And so that's why it seems like most of the free agent moves were kind of almost running in place of probably it's debatable who's better between A.J. Bouye and Chris Harris Jr. Same thing, Casey versus Wolf, and same thing, Glasgow versus McGovern. And I think probably I'd say Glasgow and Casey were upgrades, but only slight ones. And then Bouye versus Chris Harris Jr. were kind of pretty debatable. And Chris Harris Jr. is one of my favorites, so I'm probably biased, but I'd probably say it was a slight downgrade to neutral, but taking into account my bias, probably closer to neutral. So
I brought this up on the last podcast, but with Chris Harris Jr., he's going into his decline. We don't know if it'll be this year, if it'll be in a couple years, but I'm in some ways happy that his decline won't be here, because that's so painful to watch. For like thinking about Todd Helton's last year and a half, that was really painful to watch. Or like Champ Bailey just getting cut by the Broncos after the Super Bowl loss. Right. How do you feel about that? Are you like, is it I'm going to miss seeing him play, but I'm okay with him being gone, or are you really going to miss him being on the Broncos?
I'm going to miss him a lot, and I liked him as a player. I liked him as a person. I liked his story of being the 90th player added in 2011 as an undrafted free agent and having his rise. I liked the chip he had on his shoulder. And I guess what makes me so sad about is just how he left. And he didn't leave on the best of terms, and he hasn't, given us the genuine thanks for everything, I'll always be a Broncos, I love you guys post that like Derek Wolfe has given us. And so I can see your point about if he does decline, better to do it somewhere else, but we're still going through the pain of like losing such a great guy with such a bad taste in our mouth. And again, I'm a huge fan, but I'm still thinking he could have a bounce back year, and it would really, really suck to lose him with a bad taste in our mouth and then watch him go somewhere and bounce back and be with a division rival. So um, it's hard to find the silver lining in that move for me, and hard because he went for a relatively cheap deal, and like not as cheap as Wolf and Shelby Harris went for, but still a lot less than what anybody thought going into free agency, and a lot less than what we paid uh, AJ Bouye. So
Well, you bring up, the players signing for less later in free agency and the cap concerns.